So today on Wolf Brothers podcast, we have Pat Divilly. Pat has been involved in the wellness industry for over 15 years. His mission is to create a connected and authentic world. He runs programs to support men's mental health, delivers corporate wellness workshops around the world, and offers deep coaching, breath work, and body based therapies, and much more. Pat, welcome to Wolf Brothers podcast.
Thank you, man. Good to be with you. And yeah, we were just saying we haven't seen each other in a while, so it's nice to catch up.
Yeah, yeah. Delighted to have you on and I suppose pick your brain a bit about everything that you do. And I suppose the focus of this podcast in particular is around men and men's mental health. So I thought, yeah, you'd be the right man to talk to about this because I know you've been involved with men's work for a while and yeah, I'd love to delve into some of this stuff with you. But I suppose just starting off, one thing that I was just thinking when I was preparing for the podcast was like when I'm looking at the work you're doing, it seems like you're doing so many different things. Like you're working on a new book, you're doing your men's work, your breath work training at the moment, and obviously corporate workshops and different things. I just out of my own curiosity, how do you find balance between all of the work that you do and then looking after yourself with your own practices and stuff like that? And how do you, yeah, find that balance?
Yeah, it's I think it's a double-edged sword in a sense. Like I'm a really curious person and I'm grateful that my work is directly related to my passions and my curiosities. And sometimes I don't have separation there between like what I'm into and what I'm sharing. So I've tried in the last couple of months in particular to get a bit more refined. So my two focuses now are breathwork, teacher training, and a book that I'm writing. And I'm trying to scrap as much of everything else as possible. So the men's work is taking I'm out of men's work for now. I'm doing minimal amount of corporate work. Um, because as much as I enjoy the variety, I found it a little bit difficult putting on different hats. And I mean, I want to show up authentically in every moment, but it's kind of a weird experience going from facilitating a men's workshop to going into Google and doing a corporate workshop to then going to a hippie festival and doing a breath work to and I like being able to go between those different worlds, but equally, the last couple of months getting a bit more refined has definitely changed me. I wake up in the morning with a focus now, whereas before I felt like I was putting out fires a little bit. Um, so if you asked me that question a couple of months ago, I'd say it was a little bit exhausting to be going between different worlds, and it probably impacted my own energy and health in terms of not having the space to practice. But the last couple of months, refining has given me more space. It's given me more balance. It's given me more power.
Mm.
Um, it's given me back my energy that was going in too many different directions. So it's something I'm always working on. And but for now, yeah, I'm in a good place in terms of balance.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear because I do feel that at times as well because the work that I do can be quite radically different. Yeah, one day to the next. And yeah, it was just, I think I've been feeling that a bit recently of, just been jumping between, talking to school principals to talking to primary school students to holding a breathwork session to one-on-one
Mm.
sessions. And it's, yeah, you're just spreading yourself. And, something I've been working on as well as a book recently, but it's been put in the back burner because of I feel like I am putting out fires a little bit at the minute, so I'm probably where you were a few months ago in terms of my energy seems to be just a bit dispersed. But yeah, I think as you said as well, it's a constant trying to understand to find that balance.
Mm.
But also what it sounds like to me is that by just narrowing down your focus, you've really found that ah things are flowing a bit easier now. So it's something for me to think about as well, and something I am trying to narrow it. I think I'm in that
Mm.
process of narrowing, but and just seeing what is, I suppose, that true calling for me at the moment. So yeah,
Mm.
that's cool to hear that you
I
found.
def I definitely have like insecure parts of me that drive me to doing a million different things for validation, or like there's a competitive part of me that I don't want to admit to that wants to do everything. I saw you had a post up this morning about taking some space from social media or looking at less people's accounts because it was pulling your energy out away from yourself. And I have probably a bit of that where I have to catch myself. Like I go to a workshop and I'm like, oh, this is cool. I want to do similar and I want to teach similar. And it's like I'm trying to jump the gun a little bit there. So
Yeah.
I've kind of committed to myself to just staying in my lane, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I've spoken to Niall, who you know about this as well, where there is that tendency where we learn something and we try to embody it and then hopefully teach it. But mm, I want to have more space in my life where I can have my own personal practices that aren't a part of what I'm teaching, if that makes sense. So
Yes.
it's an insecure part that I just need to keep an eye on because he wants to take over and he wants to do it all and he wants to be validated and he wants to be out there and he wants to be top of people's mind. And it's like, no, none of that stuff matters.
Yeah, that definitely resonates as well. I'm like, I get the same. I think that's one of the reasons I decided, yeah, I put up that post this morning to like, I'm just going to unfollow people on Instagram because I felt it was even like looking at your own stuff and other people. I'm like, oh, I could maybe do something like that. And exactly what you're saying, like you're looking at other people's workshops, you're like, I could do that too. And it is
Yeah.
that feeling of like, yeah, maybe you could, but it's like, is that what you're really here for? And do you need to get that validation? So,
Mm.
and like, there is certain things that I've started to step away from that I have been doing. Say with the with Wolf Academy, I used to do, talks to like big groups, and now I just don't really feel like that's me anymore. I just so I'm moving into the circles with the men's circles, and that's more me. So it's just like I don't need to try and do everything. I just need to find what is maybe calling to me and maybe what's my unique gift that I can give and stop trying to do everything that everyone else is doing. So yeah, one of the reasons I got off from following everyone was just to refocus and find that clarity. So yeah, thanks for sharing that because I think it's really inspiring to see you being able to hold that authenticity despite having like quite a large following because I think it's quite easy to get caught up in the follower. Like obviously I wouldn't have experienced that myself, but I can presume it's easy for people to get caught up in the followers and you're nearly sharing what they want to see rather than staying true to yourself. So it's very inspiring for me to watch your journey and how you can stay authentic. So yeah, fair play.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a book, Cormac. I don't know if you've read Essentialism. Have you come across that
No.
book, Greg McKeown? I mean, like a lot of books, there's like a core principle in it, so there's probably no need to read the full book. I always listen to people's podcasts because you get the core of the idea. But I think he talks about something like you start something new and you're kind of doing the essentials. So, you start Wolf Brothers and you're doing the kind of core pieces, and that's what makes it what it is. And then you start to achieve a little bit of success and opportunities start to come, and you start kind of taking those opportunities. And every opportunity you take, you almost get pulled away from your center and pulled away from the core. And then you can wake up one morning and be like, geez, I'm not doing it. It's kind of like someone joining the gym and doing deadlifts and squats and bench press and getting great results. And then they add like some machines and stuff over time. And suddenly the deadlifts and the bench press and the squats that were getting the result disappear.
Mm,
So essentialism is getting back to the absolute essential, and refining and honing away at everything else. And he calls it the disciplined pursuit of less, which I think is quite powerful.
mm,
And I think it's brave and I think it's courageous. I was talking to someone about this yesterday where, yeah, they're taking a year out of their life to just do inner work. And I said to them, anyone in your life will probably say, "Oh, it's easy for you," or "It's lucky for you because you've got money." He's got money, but everyone, a lot of people have money and are terrified. The money's almost like more of a constraint because they're like they don't want to lose that money. So I was saying it's brave to step away, I think, and just yeah, be honest with yourself.
yeah, definitely. And there has definitely been moments where opportunities have come that I knew weren't in alignment, and it was like the shiny temptation that I was like, this is just maybe a test to see if I'm committed to the mission. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting to as you go on the journey just to see how it unfolds and what appears. But yeah, it's remembering why you started and staying true to that. So
Mm.
yeah, and I would love a year off to do inner work, but not just yet. So yeah, I suppose in terms of, I know you said that the men's work is kind of on the back burner at the moment, but
Mm.
you've been in this space for a long time, starting off in terms of helping people with fitness. But what have you seen over the last number of years in terms of men's work in Ireland, or men kind of going into doing the inner work, and has that changed in recent years, or is there some resistance, or what have you kind of seen with that over the last number of years?
Mm. Yeah, I suppose the quick snapshot is I started in fitness and I did that for a couple of years. And I've always kind of, to some degree, done things my own way. Like I'd never been to a fitness class before I taught my first fitness classes. So I didn't really know what I was doing, which was good in a way because I didn't have a rule book that I had to follow. I just kind of did things my way and it seemed to work. And then I moved into personal development and I experienced a lot of personal development seminars over the years, but I did things my own way. And early on, it was just women coming to the seminars because they'd come out of the fitness following that I had. And then gradually men started showing up and more men started showing up. And so I started organizing men's circles. And it was kind of the same as the fitness. I had never been to a men's circle. I'd never been to a men's event. I'd never read any of the books about men's work. I didn't know what men's work was. I just called it men's personal development workshop. So in retrospect or after that, I started going to workshops and seminars and all that kind of stuff. What am I seeing? I There's a hunger for it for sure. I think and it's changing. I think everything's changed. I mean, when I came into fitness 15, 20 years ago, there wasn't an industry in Ireland for fitness. You could work in a hotel gym, maybe. But there wasn't guys really making a living from it. Obviously, fitness blew up. I always credit Geordie Shore for that. Like people are like, where did that come? I think Geordie Shore was the thing that changed. Like guys looking after themselves, not looking after themselves, but fake tan and clothes and all that kind of stuff. I think that was where the shift happened. And then personal development, there wasn't really a industry, but it's grown with Instagram and all these things. And I think it's kind of a natural progression. People start looking after their body. They see they can make changes when they focus on something, and then they start thinking bigger. And then the men's piece, I think men are just like really hungry for it. Like certain men are just hungry for it, and different things drive different men to the work. I think for some, it's like failure and being brought to their knees makes them see, I need support. For other men, they achieve everything they ever wanted, and that brings them to their knees because they recognize it wasn't what they really wanted. For other guys, it's a midlife crisis where they wake up, and I sometimes talk about the midlife crisis being a man who's overlooked his needs since his teens. So as a teenager, he looks around him and he sees what he's supposed to want, the pretty girlfriend and the nice car, and he kind of attaches to those things. And then for the next 20, 30 years, he chases those things. And he realizes in his midlife that he's never been authentic about what he actually wants. And rather than taking up a hobby or doing something like to look after himself, he goes to the other extreme and he says, look, my needs are all that matters. And he gets a sports car and a younger partner and stuff and just burns his life to the ground. That's the sideline. But, you see these different reasons why guys come to wanting to figure out, like, who am I beyond kind of the guy in the pub that's talking about football or the kind of stereotypical, archetypical man. So,
Mm.
um, I probably drifted away a bit there from the question, but I think there's a hunger for it. I think it's great to see different guys doing different styles and different types of work. Like there's guys that will go to your sessions that would never come to mine and vice versa. And I think that's important. And again, as long as we're showing up authentically and we're doing our own work, I think we'll attract the right people. And um, yeah, I think it's great to see what's been happening in Ireland the last couple of years. There's guys doing this work for decades. I think sometimes when we come into I know for me, when I come into work, I think I'm the first one doing something. It's like, no, there's elders here that are doing this stuff for decades. So, the Mankind Project and these different organizations that do great work. So, yeah, I think it's only getting better.
Yeah, and definitely resonate with a lot of what you said there in terms of especially men turning up to your sessions and the men turning up to my sessions. And yeah, it's like there is a underneath it all, there is maybe foundations of men's work, but the way we approach it is very different maybe, and people will resonate with different energies of facilitators. And that's I think that's an important thing as well for any men holding space to remember that they need to bring their authentic self and not just try to copy the Mankind Project or whoever else is doing men's work. And obviously they do great work, but it's finding that unique um, side of things that you have, and yeah, and it's been interesting to meet other men holding space in these men's groups and just hearing their stories and seeing what they bring into it. And I think I'm still at the stage where I'm holding breath work for men, and I'm going to bring in more of the circles as well into that. But I'm still kind of finding out my way of working with men, which is just an interesting journey because I want to, meet them where they are and bring them on the journey as well. And like breathwork seems to be for some men they're open to that, and then some are still a bit like it needs to be more social, like a hike or going to the woods or something like that. But yeah, it's just finding what obviously I feel is authentic to me, and then what the men are ready to come into. Because I think, as you said, there is definitely a hunger there, and I suppose from my own experience, I feel like there's a calling for men now to really step into it, and I think that yeah, men are hearing that call. Like just even people I know, like friends who maybe thought I was a way of the fairies doing all this work on myself and spiritual work, and but now they're starting to get called into it, and it's just really interesting to see. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time in Ireland for that. And I suppose, do you feel like Ireland is maybe a little bit behind in terms of men's work, and who would you say is leading the charge in terms of other countries, or what do you see there?
I don't look a lot at what's happening outside of here, but I think Ireland and the UK is quite grounded in what we're doing. I think we might not be as fancy or technical or have as great social media presence or whatever it might be, but I feel like the work is honest and it's real and it's grounded. Just going back to kind of like what do we bring to the men that we work with, I'd love to finish a workshop and have the men say, "Wow, Pat, you're a genius. Like it's incredible what you shared about the archetypes or whatever." But that's never the feedback. The feedback for me is always, it's nice to be in a space where I know I'm not the only one that's struggling with what I'm struggling with, or it was amazing to be able to share with a man something I've never shared with anyone before, having just met him. So I think I've definitely made that mistake of trying to impress people
Mm,
with my knowledge or my intellect or my clever framework or whatever it might be. And of course, I know we're going to talk about the archetypes today. I think they're an amazing map of the psyche. But I think the starting point with all of this is just, for lack of a better word, safe space and kind of, I think of it as men have been put in a box, as women have been put in boxes, and it's kind of like we spend our whole life in that box, having to be a certain way. So be stoic, be a hard worker, be aggressive if you need to be aggressive. And so you live in that box. And then I think of a men's circle as an opportunity to inch outside of the box and just see that you're not going to be rejected. You're not going to be shamed. You can do that. And it's like anything, you practice new ways of being and you suddenly, your capacity in life expands. But, I think the work, as I say, in Ireland is honest. I think it's nice that all the men's work facilitators, I think, are pretty close to one another in terms of like, I don't think there's any rivalries or any of that kind of stuff. So I think we all happily refer people to one another um, and we say about one guy might like my sessions and one guy might like yours. Others will love to dip in and out of different sessions and different energies and depending on what they need at different times. So yeah, I think I don't know that we're behind.
mm,
We're a small country and I think there's a lot of great work happening here.
mm. No, I like to hear that actually, because again you can get caught up comparing to, I guess, Australia, maybe they're way ahead, but then chatting to a guy that like he doesn't feel it's as grounded as what we're doing here. So it may look fancy, but that doesn't mean it's more impactful. And yeah, for me, the groundedness is important, and making sure we're staying connected to the land as well when we're doing the work. Um, but yeah, I'd love to go into some of the archetypes, because I know this is an area that you're very well versed in, and obviously I'm aware of them, and I've done the Mankind Project initiation and training and stuff like that. And but in terms of just, I suppose, for men and myself, but for men who want to kind of understand these aspects of the psyche and how they, you know, help us navigate through life. Maybe just even starting off with, yeah, the background of these archetypes and where you came across them yourself.
Hmm. Well, Carl Jung would talk a lot about the archetypes in Jungian psychology, and it's the idea of like these universal energies that exist across culture, across time. So you think about a father energy. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, there's kind of a sense that comes with that of being fatherly. Or you think about a trickster energy, or a saboteur, or a magician, or there's so many archetypes, there's, countless number. And I think he once said that if a picture paints 1,000 words, it would take 1,000 pictures to paint an archetype or something like that. So it's a real sense of an energy. And some of Jung's students looked at some of the more some of the archetypes that directly relate to men. So there was a book written called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and it was written as a means of helping men understand the psyche and what was going on for them. And when we talk about understanding the psyche, we're talking about we have a sense of who we are. We've got our persona or our ego or what we present to the world. And for a lot of us, we think that's all that we are. But then we also have the shadow, which is the opposite of our persona typically. So if I personify or if I identify as someone who's hardworking and kind, the opposite of that will be in my shadow. So being lazy and unkind maybe is in my shadow. And a lot of us love to believe that there's good people and bad people in the world and look away from ourselves and recognize that there's good and there's evil in us and there's up and there's down and there's everything in between. So the beauty of the archetypes is it can help us to understand some of our shadowy behaviors. So we can go into the separate ones, but as a kind of framework or an entry point, the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover, you can think of it that you've got these energies living within you. Some of them will be overactive, where they're overpowering your psyche. Some of them will be underactive, where they're somewhat dormant. And some of them will be integrated, where they're in a healthy place where you can kind of channel them. So you think about someone like Conor McGregor, um, he is probably overtaken by the king archetype and becomes a tyrant where he thinks that he's the only one that matters. And a healthy king actually has a care for everyone around him and wants the greater good of all. So that might be an example of a king overtaking the person and them making the mistake of thinking they are the energy as opposed to them experiencing the energy.
Mm,
Um, then you can have the opposite where someone's shut down and they've completely disconnected from their king energy and they put people on pedestals and they think everyone else has the answers and they put the government up there and they put the media up there and they've lost their sense of agency or voice. So those would be kind of the two extremes of the king. The
mm,
king for us is about leadership in our life and a sense of sovereignty, a sense of purpose, a sense of where we're going. Some tenets of the healthy king will be you've got a sense of direction in your life. You know where your kingdom starts and where it ends. So, who's important to you? What's important to you? You experience joy, which is different to happiness. Happiness is kind of a temporary thing. You might be happy eating an ice cream, but joy is something that could come even in difficult times if you're doing things that are meaningful. So, I'm sure as you build Wolf Brothers, Wolf Academy, it's like you'll experience joy even in the challenges because it's got meaning. Your king is online. So healthy king has a sense of service, a sense of contributing to the community, doing things for the greater good of all. The emotion associated with it would be joy. Um, the shadows of it are again too much king, where I'm a tyrant and I only care about myself. We see that in a lot of political figures in the world. There's a lack of care for others outside of themselves. There's greed. There's selfishness, and then too little king is yeah, abdicating all power. And each of the archetypes will have a wound. So the wound for the king is the belief that I'm not enough. And so if you take on the belief that I'm not enough, there's two ways you can respond. The first is to give up and just kind of surrender to that. I'm not enough. And you just, you become abdicating king. The other response is, I'm going to show you how enough I am. And then you become a tyrant. So that would be the first of the energies.
mm,
One useful piece, maybe just to throw in, is Robert Bly, who is an amazing poet and author. I think I'm paraphrasing here because somebody shared this with me. I have not seen Robert Bly directly say it, but they said something to the effect that he said between his throat and his balls, he could feel nothing from the time he was a teenager because he completely shut down that area. So he had no sense of his emotion at any time. And so his thing was that the archetypes can allow us a connection again to our emotion and an understanding of our emotion so we can reconnect to our feelings. So again, the king is joy.
brilliant. Yeah. I Yeah, I don't know if I haven't heard too much about the overactive king and the underactive king, and I love that because it just you can obviously there's extremes like Conor McGregor or political figures where they're completely overactive, and there's extremes where yeah you see men in who are just completely shut down and depressed and maybe even suicidal. They don't believe in
mm,
themselves at all.
mm,
But I suppose I tend to reflect everything to myself because I'm that's just the way I think, and maybe it's my ego. But I can see the yeah how I can fluctuate between those states of like even recent yeah even the last couple of years, just like this kind of egoic sense of inflated self coming up and being like whoa,
mm.
and then at the same time it's like a it's nearly like a paradox of like not feeling good enough. So it's kind of this strange. I remember doing a coaching session with a guy, and I could sense that he didn't believe in himself, but at the same time he really believes in himself.
Yeah.
And so it's just this weird paradox that we can experience, and it's like that energy is kind of moving up and down. Um, so yeah, I find that so interesting, um, and I suppose in terms of like finding that connection to our joy, like what is usually the way to get back to the king? It's you know like how do you get clear on where
Yeah.
your kingdom is, and how do you get back that joy?
I think, I think king is a lot about power and authentic power. So the healthy king has got authentic power that comes from within, whereas the other two are either giving your power away or trying to hold power over others. Authentic power doesn't require me to hold it over anyone else. In terms of how to get back to it, I mean, there's lots of ways you could look at it. I think one is maybe as simple as it sounds, is writing a bit of a vision for yourself 12 months from now where you'd like to be. So you're getting a sense of direction again. Another might be looking back over your life and when you were the happiest or when you experienced the most joy or you felt the most yourself and try to put some of those things back into your life. As you say, you can pendulate between the two, or you might notice that in some areas you're underactive. So maybe in work, I feel very emasculated and disempowered and I lose my balls and I can't speak up for myself. But then I go home and I become a tyrant with my family to almost compensate for the powerlessness that I feel. So this is not to shame ourselves, but to recognize these patterns that are playing out and to say, well, I've lost my voice in work because I feel disempowered, and then I'm trying to compensate at home by overpowering, and neither of these are a healthy expression of power. So,
Mm.
again, for that man to find vision, to connect in with his passions, um, to have a sense of his values is an important one, and to live a values-based life. I think those would be some of the starting points for the king. Um, and then embodiment practices, I think you could do like visualizations where you actually take on the posture. I was in a workshop years ago, and it was really interesting to do. Was They had us close our eyes, and it was not a men's workshop, it was something different, but they said close your eyes and take on the posture of someone who's afraid of the world and someone who puts people on pedestals, and you're kind of closing yourself off and rounding your shoulders and stuff like that. And then they said now take on the posture of someone who's going to take on the world and doesn't care about anyone and is just cocky and arrogant, and the shoulders go back and you're like displaying the chest. And then they had us go back and forth between the two, and then eventually they said, how does it feel to be between the two? And so you'd find the posture between the kind of people pleaser and the tyrant. And it was this really, you felt really, I felt at least really kind of solid. I felt my feet on the ground. I felt this strong posture. There wasn't a cockiness or an arrogance, but they were talking about finding the balance between dignity and humility, or teacher and student. Um, that might be another thing that could be interesting for people just to feel rather than, thinking about these concepts. How does it feel to collapse? How does it feel to be cocky? And what's the in between?
Yeah, I love that. Love that exercise. I haven't done that myself, but I can I can imagine finding that center just in your body, being
Mm,
just that sense of oh, I can connect to this now physically in my body, because yeah, the mental stuff is great, but when you can move it into the body, like where's your center as stepping into your king? Like even if you're going into an interview or before you go into work, like finding that center and be like, who do I want to be today? I love that, and I think those practices, such as like writing down a vision for your life, getting clear on your values, like they sound simple, but they're actually, they're so powerful as well. Even for me, who's been doing those, and I'm sure you have for a number of years, it's like always coming back to them and not getting lost in all these new practices and just coming back to like, wait, what are my values again? Am I sticking to them? Um, because even if for me, if I think I was chatting to one of my friends about this as well recently, like he doesn't have too much of like a clear vision at the moment, but he has values, and I'm like, once you have values, I think you're fine
mm,
because you can still navigate. You don't have to see the mountaintop. just yet. You can still navigate your way without losing integrity. So I suppose as a, for men who are just maybe getting into the work, or obviously there's no like one path of doing it, but I think starting with values is a great place to start, and then looking at mission and vision. So yeah, that's brilliant. I think that's quite a clear king. And actually, one other thing as well, I think I may have even said this on another podcast, but I feel like this association, the association we have with power is often a negative one, because we hear people saying like power is the opposite of love or something like that, which I completely disagree with, because I think what they're referring to is that power over someone else. But I think, yeah, fear is the opposite of love. Power is necessary, to bring more love into the world. So I think we need to also, yeah, bring back that healthy relationship with that power, that personal power.
Yeah, I think they talk about king is kind of a difficult one in two senses. One is that king usually doesn't come online until maybe your 40s, because you've got to go out and be a lad, and you've got to go out and try and prove yourself to the world before it kind of brings you to your knees, and then you find humility and stuff. A lot of the men's work books will talk about 35 being a turning point where maybe you've achieved some worldly success and you've bought a house or you've met a partner or whatever. You've done kind of some of those things that your ego needed. And
Mhm.
then the second half of life is more about self understanding and giving back. But the other challenge with king energy is some of the other energies you can look into the world and you can kind of see them reflected back. So, for example, the warrior is very much about taking action, going out, getting things done. You can find someone like David Goggins that really embodies the warrior energy, and you can look to that. But when we think about healthy king energy, it's quite difficult to see in the world. You see a lot of people abdicating, you see a lot of people holding power over others. It's hard, I think, in this generation. I don't know if we have many figureheads that globally people would look to and say that's a good man.
Mhm.
Same.
Yeah, because I suppose the way the political system maybe is set up is not really set up to honor the humility of someone. And
Mhm.
it is kind of set up where you kind of need to, if you really want to get to the top of a political system, you need to be a snaky fucker in some ways, um and backstabbing, and like it's hard to have that integrity and make it up there. But yeah, I suppose that's, I was going to say something there, but yeah, that was interesting just about the warrior, I suppose, because if we even, yeah, start moving down into the warrior now, because
Mm,
that's a necessary, yeah, so it's a necessary step to sometimes, create the things you want in the world for your, like, to feed the ego, because it's an important part before you can, as you said, be humbled into the king. And I
mm,
think for a while, I think I was listening to Ram Dass and all these lads who are great, but it was nearly like, oh, get rid of the ego, or Eckhart Tolle or whatever, and just be in the now and just be in this like love energy. But it's also like, but I feel I'm still here to do something first before I start going
mm,
into that. So I think it's nearly, what I see with some people is like, some men even, that they're nearly skipping the steps of like developing their ego and developing the self, and they're trying to go straight into you know Ram Dass level of oneness. And I'm like, you need to actually do the steps. I think someone, a podcast, I think it was Eric Godsey, he was talking about how the sun rises, and it's like that's kind of the early years of your life. Like, you're rising, the sun is rising up into the sky, and once it hits like the highest point in the sky, and then it starts coming back down, and that's kind of the dissolution of the ego. So the first half of your life you're kind of building it, and then you're letting it
yeah.
go, but you have to build it first before you can get rid of it. So yeah, so moving into then the warrior, what do you see with the warrior?
So the warrior, again, each archetype will have kind of a core wound, an emotion, and then the polarity. So for the warrior, the core wound is I don't exist, and that might be a child who is overpowered by their parents. It could be two things. You're either overpowered, where you're not able to find your own voice, so there's a sense of merging, and you don't know who you are because you're never allowed to make your own decisions, never allowed to have your own kind of way in the world. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is the parents are never around. So for us to individuate and to become ourselves, we need to bump up against other people because it's where we start to understand what our boundaries are, what's us, what's them. So if a parent is too overbearing or a parent is too absent, the child misses out on both, and there's kind of a sense of being invisible or not existing. And so the compensations then, if I think I don't exist, there's two compensations. One is I become a people pleaser and I put everyone else's needs ahead of my own because I don't realize that I have needs because my needs never mattered in my youth. The other extreme is to become a bully where my needs matter and your needs don't matter. So one person prioritizes other people's needs, the other person prioritizes their needs, and then the healthy embodiment of the warrior requires clean anger, which is about um, it's about people think anger is a bad thing. It's how we use our anger, obviously, that makes it good or bad. But it's about direction, it's about action, it's about passion, it's about fire in the belly. That's the healthy expression of if I'm communicating from warrior and clean anger. If you upset me about something or something happens, I'm able to say, Cormac, when you did this, it made me feel, hurt and sad, and that's not okay with me. Communicating in that way, I'm being clear, I'm being assertive, I'm expressing what I need to express, I'm honoring my needs, but I'm not bringing it to a destructive, dark energy where I'm trying to rip you apart. So warrior is about anger, and it's about anger as a protective energy. So protecting what's important as opposed to destroying. And so what's important is our values, our needs, um, our boundaries. So if you think about the king as having the vision for your life, the warrior supports the king by taking action on the vision and protecting. So if part of my king's vision is sobriety in my life, it's my warrior that's the part of me that's able to say, no, I don't drink anymore. That's not a part of who I am. So that's kind of how they start to work together. If your king is not online, the warrior will oftentimes just be this workhorse who doesn't really know what to do with himself because he's got no sense of direction. So that's the man who's maybe just working all the time, feels like he's, kind of like what we talked about when we first got on the call, that kind of thing of trying to do everything, but not really having an overarching vision. And that might be an absence of king and kind of warrior becoming overactive. And then I suppose culturally, men were raised to warrior was one that got praise and approval, but it's just a case of is it healthy warrior, that's the question. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And again, reflecting back on myself, I can see how, yeah, I just didn't feel, I became the people pleaser. So obviously I didn't see my own needs. Something I still struggle with. Sometimes I tend to, with my partner, really, that's kind of where it comes up is like I tend to look to her needs before looking at mine. But it's not
Mm,
out of it's not always from just a loving place. It's more like I want to make sure I'm keeping you happy. So it's kind of self-preservation. People pleasing is more self-preservation than actual genuine unconditional love. Um, yeah, so that definitely makes sense. And then as well, for me, I shut down a lot of my anger. And I suppose it was actually the Mankind Project. You were there. I suppose you probably witnessed
mm,
it as well, where I really started tapping back into that.
mm.
And I feel only since I tapped into that have I seen the importance of that clean anger or that sacred anger. And I also feel what's going on now with, I'm going to have Niall Munley on here to talk about the work he's doing with men. And I suppose he's been seeing it as well, that there seems to be some sort of, now, without getting into conspiracy theories, but some sort of agenda to not really show what's going on with men because like, a lot of men are struggling and they're not reporting on male suicides and stuff like that. But I feel like there's a real disempowerment of men at the moment, and we're kind of made out to be the bad guys, especially white males. And I suppose that's just disempowering us. And I just see a lot of men, because I could see that was how I was as well, but a lot of men that are just disempowered and not connected to that sacred anger or that clean anger energy. Um, and I suppose, yeah, like how do they get that back, or how do men start to get that connection back?
Um, Embodiment is a certain amount of it for sure, in terms of like it could be as simple as getting the punch bag out or hitting the mitts, and one thing I see is that I think this is a fault in some courses or some programs that catharsis is seen as like the way. So someone's very shut down and the facilitator just tries them to get to like go crazy and stuff like that. And you can do that, but sometimes you blow yourself out of your body. So someone can scream and shout and stuff like that, but they almost dissociate and it's almost like they aren't themselves anymore. So I think proper anger work, you have to stay in your body. So some if I was working with someone, I'd potentially get them on the punch bag. I'd have them channel something that's really a source of irritation or frustration for them, or something that's really upset them, or a place they've been violated, or the boundaries have been overstepped, or whatever it might be. I'd have them breathe into that space, and then I'd have them maybe for 20 seconds let it all go on the punch bag, and then I'd have them ease off and breathe into that space and feel the power and feel the energy so that they're staying in the body. I think that's an important piece, not to blow yourself out of your yeah, not to blow yourself out of your body. Um, what else? I guess knowing your values is important. Like you got to know them before you, and then because I'm this, similar to yourself, like I still challenged a lot with that people pleasing part, or that I'm really I just got back from a retreat a couple of weeks ago, and I'm really noticing the dozens of times in the day where I feel a tension with maybe someone I haven't heard from in a while, and I wonder if I've done something wrong, and I want to reach out to them, and I have to stop myself and say, I don't need, this is not. I'm always trying to, because the nice guy or the people pleaser, really, I think they're trying to tend to their anxiety by making other people, bringing other people closer, or whatever it might be. Um, so it might be setting yourself a challenge. Like I'm at the moment, I'm doing 6 months of celibacy at the moment, like just taking a break from any form of dating or anything related to romance or sexuality with women. Um, and part of my practice is trying to be more clear in my communication, because the people pleaser or the nice guy is kind of a dangerous man, because he's manipulating in everything that he says. He seems like a nice guy, but he's telling everyone what they want to hear. And so I don't think that creates safety for someone. So I'm trying to get better on just being clearer. So people could take that on as a challenge, just to maybe like a practical thing you could do is don't say yes to anything in the next 30 days without giving it a couple of hours. And just tell people that my practice right now is I'll come back to you in the morning, but I'm not committing to anything in the moment, because I know that my people pleaser takes over sometimes. So that maybe taking up boxing or something like that would be useful. Um, uh, all again, back to simple things. It could be having a short to-do list in the morning, because the warrior is about being decisive and taking action. So it could be, here's the three things I'm going to do today, and I'm not going to, fuck my feelings basically to a certain point. And that doesn't mean you dismiss them completely, but and you might pick people that represent. So again, you might think, okay, I'm tapping into my David Goggins now for the next hour. And a lot of this is about, we mentioned Ram Dass earlier and kind of the spiritual evolution and trying to ascend and all this kind of stuff. A lot of understanding the archetypes is for the purpose of recognizing the different energies, so that you can shift in and out of different energies depending on what the moment needs. So in work, in the corporate space, I probably don't want to be in my lover energy a lot, because I need to get things done. I need to be boundaried. I need to be clear. I need to be assertive. The challenge becomes when a man becomes so comfortable in that warrior energy that he comes home from the office and he's not able to get out of that, and he's shouting at his kids and he's bullying everyone around him, because that's his only. So I think for men, it's the archetypes allow us to find range again. So yeah, it's dipping in and out of energies, but as I say, some embodiment practices, being clear on trying to be clearer in your communication, having a list of things you're going to do in the day. Um, those are some pieces.
Yeah, brilliant. And I love the way you did bring it back down to the very practical, because it is like these are archetypes for, how we live and move in the world. So like that warrior is tapping into the kind of David Goggins archetype, or because I think some men kind of dismiss men's work because they think it's all about just sharing your feelings and sitting in
Yeah.
circle. And I'm like, it's not actually, it's stepping more into your integrity and not fucking being a bullshitter and stuff like that. So doing what you say you're going to do. And I love the way you were talking about being able to shift into different archetypes for different moments. And I think it's Jamie Wheel said it on a course I was doing with him, that, enlightenment for him is matching state to task. So it's, what's the task in front of you and what state do you need to be in
Mm,
that moment?
mm,
If you're like the samurais, they could have been enlightened, but when they're on the battlefield, they're tapped into their warrior. Like they're not, all present and loving. Well, I'm sure they're present, they're just not all loving. But yeah, so to balance the warrior, I suppose, or I suppose they all kind of intersect, but maybe we can move into the lover and what that represents.
Yeah, lover's a good place to go because I think traditionally men will fall either toward the lover or toward the warrior, and they'll have kind of a default setting. So some of the guys that go to men's work and that it's easier for them will have a lot of lover energy anyway. They love to talk about their feelings, they love to share what's in the moment, all this kind of stuff. And maybe they've a hard time, maybe they've lost their balls. So maybe they were, raised in a primarily female household and they didn't see any healthy masculinity. And that was true for a lot of us if our fathers were out working or whatever it might have been. And maybe, traditionally a lot of men would see the worst of their father because the only times they see him, he's tired and he's stressed when he's come home from work. So maybe you're not getting that kind of picture of what, and that's no fault of theirs. That's the culture that a lot of us were raised in. But so some men, as I say, they can be lovey dovey and they can, but my experience of those men is sometimes they're flaky and I don't trust them because they don't follow through. They'll tell you they'll meet you for a coffee and then they text you say, "Oh, my heart doesn't feel it in this moment." Like, go fuck yourself, man. I just like I blocked this hour off, like so. And then on the flip side, men that are very warrior, which maybe archetypically is a very successful corporate driven man, will have a hard time connecting in with his feelings. So it's interesting to see where you fall on that spectrum. And that spectrum effectively is being and doing. Like at its extremes, I think about mm, yeah, the corporate driven um linear man, and then on the other side, the artist who never finishes a painting because he's so in flow. So the lover is about the wound is I'm not lovable. There's something wrong with me. I'm flawed. So we take on that message as kids that I'm not lovable. And there's two ways you can compensate. You can either just again believe it and kind of collapse, and then you go into an under expression of lover energy. This is the man who will have signs maybe of depression or apathy. He's numb. He's dissociated. He can't connect to his feelings. Yeah, there's a complete lack of feeling there. Lives in his head, lives in fantasy world. The other extreme is overtaken by the lover energy, and that's basically the addict who wants to feel it all the time. Like I always want to be in my feelings. Those men will tend to attract very like dramatic relationships. There's always drama in their life. There's substance abuse. There's because I feel unlovable. Oftentimes, those men will seek connection through substance rather than through people because the substance can't reject them. And then the healthy expression is the middle ground, which is um, allowing space for feelings, but not allowing the feelings to completely take over. So the associated emotion for the lover is grief. And the idea is that if we numb ourselves to our grief, we numb ourselves to everything else. If we can allow ourselves to be open to our grief, we can reconnect to everything else. So a healthy lover is a man who can be present, can share what's going on for him, can be empathetic toward others, can enjoy art and music and nature and all these different elements. And again, the two extremes would either be numb and disconnected or addicted and having to feel all the time. And again, people will pendulate. So you might have someone who's very disconnected in their work all week and feels numb and hates it. And then the weekend comes and they blow themselves out of their body with addiction and just go crazy because there's a lack of. And then obviously spiritual practice might bring us to the center where we allow 20 minutes every day for feeling our heart or doing a meditation. And that's more of a healthy integration. So yeah, that would be the lover.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And I've never actually separated the person who numbs all their feelings and then the addict who's actually looking for the feelings all the time. I just kind of thought someone who numbs their feelings, turns to alcohol and drugs. But I can see now what you mean, how you can, there's numbing and then there's searching for it. So that's really interesting. And again, yeah, we all have, yeah, there's a spectrum that we tend to maybe fluctuate on, and just noticing like, oh, when am I feeling that extra neediness to distract, or like
Mm.
our neediness for that connection as well. So yeah, it's really useful. And I think, yeah, for me as well, just having some sort of practice where I connect in with my heart, ideally every day. But if not, at least sitting down with it like once a week and just seeing how you're actually feeling. Obviously throughout the day, you can kind of tune in to how you're feeling, but I suppose having that practice is just like a reminder, just in case you do get caught up in, the mundane things of life and just doing the tasks, and you forget about that heart connection. And yeah, I think it's such a important place to stay connected to throughout the day, if you can. But I suppose we're so conditioned to, think from the mind, and it's like how can we drop into the heart and think from the heart. I just, some other quote is coming to me. I can't remember it exactly, but some like, um, what was it? Some indigenous people said to, was it to Carl Jung? I don't know who they said it to, but they were like, the problem with you Westerners is you think from the mind. It's like, you
Mm.
should be thinking from the heart. So I do feel there is, like a positive shift as well of people starting to move into the heart. And, even like yourself or what we're doing as well, we are more like heart led businesses, I suppose. It's not just how can I make more money? It's how can I reach my mission and help more people in a more authentic way?
Mm.
And that's what leads the business. So I think, even things like that is a step towards, more heart led way of being. But yeah, it's, I think another thing, I don't know if you've come across this, is with the lover, like a lot of men fear going into it because I think it's like if they open that grief portal, like it's just never ending. Have you noticed
Yeah.
that?
I know my grief is never ending.
Same.
Yeah, I think it terrifies us. And going back to the addict, I think the addict is a certain amount about repression. Like if I do numb the grief, the idea of shadow work is that nothing you hide goes away. It takes on a life of its own. And so the numbed grief is potentially the part that drives us to drink or drives us to porn or drives us to whatever it drives us to. And we beat ourselves up then and can't make sense of why we keep doing the thing we say we don't want to do. But there's just a terrible fear around feeling the feeling. And look, if men have a lot of backlog in terms of like what they're holding emotionally, they probably need support in terms of like, yeah, particularly I think with shame. I
Mm.
have a lot of friends in 12-step recovery over the last couple of years. Just I found it interesting. I've just connected with all these people, and then I find out they're in 12-step, and I haven't been in 12-step, but I'm like, what is it in these men? And it's just like, oh well, they're just vulnerable and they're open, and I think there's such power in like people that go to AA and stuff. They on a weekly basis they share what's going on for them, and um, someone says our secrets keep us sick. I think that's a powerful thing. And for a lot of men, there's a lot of shame because we don't say what's actually happening for us and we hide it. Um, and there's addiction as a result. But yeah,
Mm.
there is that fear of here's this is a probably a bit out there, but I don't know if I shared this story with you. I was at a Mary Sky retreat. Mary Sky, um, yeah, I was at this retreat and my grief came and I cried and I cried and I cried and it felt like I was dropping into a well that was never going to end. I cried. It felt like hours. And she came and she held my head and she held my hand and then she gave me her finger and I held her finger like I was a baby and all these memories from childhood and it was wild, really powerful. And I felt much lighter after and I felt really great and everything. And then I went back a year later and I felt myself dropping into the same grief and I saw her out of the corner of my eye walking toward me and I thought, oh, she's gonna hold my head, she's gonna hold my hand and stuff and like make everything better. And she looked at me and she sat with me and she said, when are you gonna stop being a victim? And I was just like, oh.
Holy shit.
And well, what I realized, there was a big lesson in that for me in the moment that was like, we all have grief and we all have things we've lost and we all have pain and stuff like that. And you got to give it space, but you can't be indulgent. I don't want to be indulgent. I could cry for the rest of my life for things that have happened to me.
Mm.
But why would I do that when I've got this opportunity? Equally, I can't shut down my emotions. So I think it's about containment. And again, having an awareness of that energy says, one of my teachers, John Wineland, talked about a grief process that he did for a long time when his daughter passed away. And I think he said for an hour a day, he just blocked off an hour and he'd go and hike for the hour and he just let himself fall apart for that hour. And so it was
Mm.
kind of a contained practice. So in that way, you're almost channeling your warrior to create a bit of discipline and structure around
Mm.
so that your lover or your inner feminine or whatever you want to call it can kind of fall apart. The lover energy is also associated with the inner child, which is kind of the more vulnerable, the sensuality, the innocence, the playfulness. So yeah.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Well, your experience with Mary was, yeah, it's just a great example of not getting like feeling it, but yeah, not getting too attached to just dropping into it all the time. Because yeah, it is maybe an unlimited well in some ways, but I love that John Wineland, container and the whole concept of when you just said allow himself to fall apart. I
Mm.
think especially when you're maybe stepping into your masculine and you're doing all these things with your business and you're, trying to hold everything together, and the thoughts of falling apart is just like, oh my God, that just sounds like heaven. Just to like be on a
Yeah.
mountain and just collapse just to
Yeah.
that nothingness and just let go of all the weight. So maybe I need to go do that.
Well,
But yeah.
I think things are supposed to break us, you know, and we don't let them break us in terms, and it's not breaking us, it's breaking the ego in the sense of like, I don't know, if I'm a young man in my 20s and I have my first relationship and it goes for a couple of years and she breaks up with me and my coping strategy is just go get drunk and meet other women. I'm not honoring that period of my life, you know, by not allowing myself to grieve. And if I'm to grieve, I might feel like I'm falling apart, but maybe I'm learning that I'm more vulnerable than I thought I was, and I'm more sensitive, and I have grief and all these things, and it's like breaking the old paradigm of who you thought you were. And but if we don't allow ourselves that, we just stay. I often say we mature biologically, but we get stuck psychologically. So you got men in their 40s and 50s walking around with 10-year-old psychology because at 10 they decided I'm not supposed to cry, and so they haven't cried in 40 years. And it's like you have to you have to have a massive amount of pain, I think, and grief to allow all that to fucking die because it's kept you safe up to now, you know?
Yes, and that quote comes to mind that you have to break the heart to, allow it to open. You have to keep breaking it. So
Mm,
it's like you just have to go through those heartbreak moments of grief. And yeah, like I suppose there's fear there to go into it, and right enough. But the other fear is if you don't go into it, then you'll never experience true love or true connection because you're
mm,
you're just blocked off from that heart. So that's my fear, is not having an amazing relationship, and not living my purpose, not reaching my potential. That's the fear that drives me. So that's why I'm willing to go into the hard stuff. Um,
I was at a retreat last week, Corm, and they had a meditation room upstairs, which was like a holding area. So we'd be in the meditation room between sessions, and then they'd walk us down into the main room. And
mm,
every time walking into the main, I used to cage fight when I was 18, 19. I went to America and I cage fought and fought down in Mexico and had all these wild experiences. Walking down the stairs from the meditation room into the group room to do the group therapy, I had a worse feeling where I was like, this is a lot scarier than walking to the ring. So I think the emotional stuff is hard, you know?
wow, I never knew you did cage fighting, but that's a great analogy of, yeah, it can be hard, and especially for, yeah, men who have maybe been physically strong and we think we're not afraid of anything, but then the emotional stuff can really knock us.
Mm,
But yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I suppose the other archetype then that we haven't touched upon is the magician.
mm.
Yeah.
Magician's one I struggle to explain uh, all that well, but magician is the thinking part. So you could think about the king as about being, the lover is about feeling, the warrior is about doing, and then you've got the magician about thinking. So I think Carl Jung used to talk about those four functions of thinking, doing, being, and feeling. Those are the four kind of
Mm,
elements. So magician, the wound is that I'm bad. So it's kind of shame based. Like um the I'm not enough of the king, there's kind of a sense of I'm not enough, but maybe I can become enough. But the wound of the magician is more shame based, where it's like I'm bad, I'm flawed, I can't be fixed, sort of thing. And in response to that, you've kind of got two ways you can go. You can either again collapse into it and just like believe it, and they call that the dummy. So that's an under expression of magician. So like I can't do things, I'm not capable. Other people can do things, but I can't. So you almost like you just don't see your potential. You let fear dictate your life. Fear is the gateway emotion here. So fear either paralyzes me and I hide from the world, or the other extreme is someone who over identifies with the thinking mind and becomes maybe over intellectual, and they use their intellect to strategize and move through life in a way that they feel safe. So these people can be like master manipulators for themselves and for others. So might be like an example of maybe someone who's very academic who hides behind their academic nature, even if they're into the healing arts or whatever, the healing work. You can tell that they have never actually felt or done the work because their intellect is so strong. It's this really protective force. Um, and so the middle ground for the magician is almost like a shaman or like someone that can step into transformation. So it's seeing fear not as a reason to withdraw or not as a reason to put up the defense mechanisms, but seeing fear as a catalyst for change. So my healthy magician is able to sort of recognize the patterns playing out in my life and say, oh, I keep getting into relationship, and when they get close, I push them away because there's a fear of intimacy. And I can see that as an invitation into transformation. And again, I can allow myself to fall apart in that and transform and alchemize. So I think there's an element of alchemy there. Um, so yeah, that would be magician in terms of practices for integrating that. You might look at things like journaling, where you take a step back and you look at your life in the bigger context. Introspection, reflection, time in nature. A big kind of piece that can be useful for channeling your magician is to go to personal development workshops, or go to a retreat, or go to a rites of passage where transformation can happen, because you kind of step away. I see it a lot about stepping away from the kind of ordinary world into potential. So if you work 9 to 5 and you've got your family life and you do that for years on end, that becomes your ordinary world, and you become confined by certain fears that you can't even see. And maybe you go for a week long retreat where there's a lot of silence, and now you get a perspective of your life, and you're like, oh,
Mm,
my whole life has been driven by a sense of not being enough, and I'm driving myself into the ground, and then working with that. So that would kind of be magician.
brilliant. Yeah, I love how going through them all just gives a real good map of how to do the work as well, like how to continue to
Mm,
just evolve and grow. And the magician just going deep into the fear and like transmuting that energy into,
mm,
who you're meant to be. I think that's, yeah, it's very actionable for me anyway, just listening to it. It's like, oh yeah, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's what I do when the fear comes up most of the time. I'm sure a lot of the time I still avoid it, but eventually when I catch up to it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is for me to grow. But it's brilliant. And I suppose just to say as well that I was listening to Michael Mead speaking on a podcast recently, and he was talking about the archetypes, the four we just went through, and like obviously, and you mentioned at the start that Jung had loads of archetypes, and you can't really just put the soul into four archetypes for a man, but these are ones that really help us give us a map. We're obviously multifaceted beings with, and we're very complex, but I suppose just to enable to understand our journey, these four archetypes are really beneficial, I feel. So yeah, thanks for going through those in such
mm.
detail, and I hope people listening got resonated with a few, and maybe seen where they're maybe underactivated or overactivated, and even if they feel like there's one they want to maybe start working on, whether that's the lover, start to feel a bit more, or maybe they're just a bit flaky and they need a bit more warrior, or they need a vision,
Mm.
the king, or they need to face some of their fears and go into that magician. It's like, even if they just start with one, and then the path will unfold from there. So yeah, thanks very much, Pat, for going through those. I just wanted to ask you, you're working on another book. Is it a secret, or is it are you able to share what you're working on?
Yeah, and it's a shadow work book. So I'm sort of hoping to meet the mainstream, I suppose, with a book that's. I feel like the market is maturing. So like obviously the last couple of years, people have gotten into reading books and stuff like that around personal development. Like there's some of the best selling books out there, and then but the happy clappy kind of everything's going to be, just the goal setting stuff. All of the stuff, as we've kind of mentioned, has its place. Like everything has its place. Goal setting, time management, like all those things, and um. But for people that have done a lot of that work, I think the next step then is potentially looking at shadow, which is what are the unconscious drivers, what's below the surface, the iceberg analogy of most of us understand ourselves as being the part above the iceberg, that's the ego, but the shadow is all that's below it. And that's typically what's running our lives. So yeah, it's helping. The new book is about helping people to understand kind of how do you reintegrate anger and grief, and how do you bring in shadow work into your relationship so you can help one another connect deeper. And so that's the plan. Maybe just to round out as well with the archetypes, just to, once we have those four: king, warrior, magician, lover, um people might start to see the team, them as a team. So your king has a vision. Your magician supports the king by kind of strategizing. That's another part of that, is kind of like, so my king decides I want to get sober and I want to run a marathon. My magician comes in and kind of helps me with strategies to make that happen and make it a reality. My warrior gets up in the morning and takes the actions in line with the king's vision. And then the lover allows me to enjoy the journey and to create space and to be honest with myself about what I'm feeling. We talk about king a lot, but the challenge is
there was a quote that said something like, when the king is off his throne. I did a visualization on this once. You might have done similar with the king leaving his throne
Mm,
and just like just turns into chaos because the warrior is going around with a sword just chopping people up because he doesn't have any orders to follow. So that's us overworking.
mm,
The lover is just drinking themselves silly because they just want to feel, so they're addicted. And so again, our cases of addiction or living in our heads or being overachievers oftentimes come down to the lack of meaning and purpose because we don't have a sense of sovereignty and vision. So I
mm.
think the vision piece would be a nice place for people to start.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's. I think men love these archetypes because it's just like, oh, now it makes sense. I can see it. It's not so complex. It's kind of broken down. Um, but yeah, brilliant. And yeah, I look forward to reading your book on the shadow work because yeah, it's something I've been doing a lot of recently, and I did a good bit with Niall there and Shadow Hunters, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's there's just so much gold in the shadow when you go into it. Um, and yeah, is there anything else you have? You have your breathwork facilitator training. I think that's already started though. So is there anything coming up that you have that you people can join or anything like that?
Uh, no, I'm kind of going dark for now. I'm just gonna like this. I'm just disappearing. I mean, another breathwork teacher training next February, so there's a kind of a waiting list going for that, which is great. But no, I'm just fully in on the breathwork teacher training. It's really exciting just to even take the breathwork out of it, to have a group that I work with once a week for 6 months is really kind of exciting and amazing group of people. So that and the book, and yeah,
Mm,
I'm struggling to do social media. It's not really interesting me anymore. I'm not podcasting anymore. I'm not doing workshops anymore.
mm,
So a lot of the old stuff has fallen away, and maybe it'll come back. But for
mm.
now, people can go and listen to my old podcasts if they're craving a bit of
Yeah,
chat.
I love that. I love just your ability to just decide, no, I'm not doing this anymore, and let go of any expectations of like, oh, I should keep this going because I've been doing it for so long, and people expect it. So yeah, fair play.
Thank
And
you.
I'll keep the podcast going for now when you're taking a break.
Do.
But yeah, Pat, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, and
Likewise.
yeah, I'm excited to see how your journey unfolds. And well, I won't see it on Instagram now, but we'll have to talk in person. But
Yeah, man.
yeah,
And
best of
just
luck with
to
everything.
just to acknowledge you on the work that I've always admired what you're doing the last couple of years, and I often talk about you to other people just in terms of like it's really important work, and yeah, it's really powerful. So I mentioned I was on a retreat last week, and a lot of what came up for me was around my wounding as a teenage man and kind of how that influenced how I relate to women or stuff like that. So the power of the work that you do is yeah, probably won't get enough credence or praise, but I see it. So well
Cheers,
done.
Pat. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you mentioning us to a few schools and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you very much for that. And until next time, see you then.
Salon.